My dad once told me straight to my face that I ruined his life. Those words cut deeper than anything else he'd ever said. But what he didn't know was that I was about to give him a mirror to look into, one that reflected more than just me. And then I walked away, leaving everything he thought he controlled behind. You won't believe what happened next. My name is Claire, and growing up, my dad always carried this weight around him like a storm cloud that never cleared. You know the kind, the type of heaviness that doesn't just sit on someone's shoulders but spreads, soaking into the walls, the air, the way dinner plates clink on the table. Followed him into every room, into every conversation. And somehow, without ever being told outright, I knew that storm cloud had something to do with me. First, I thought I was imagining it. I mean, how could a kid like me be responsible for the darkness in a grown man's eyes? But over time, it became unmistakable. There were these small looks, quick glances that said more than words ever could. The tight line of his mouth when I laughed too loud. The sigh when I asked for help with homework. The way his eyes glazed over when I told him something I was excited about. Like my joy was an inconvenience. When I was 10, I won first place in my school's science fair. I'd stayed up late for a week straight, gluing together my volcano model with vinegar and baking soda and red food dye. I remember practicing my explanation in front of the bathroom mirror, whispering under my breath because I knew if he heard me talking to myself again, he'd say I was being dramatic. When I finally showed him the blue ribbon I got, he barely looked up from the TV. "Don't go around bragging about it," he muttered. "Nobody likes a show-off." That's all he said. He didn't ask me what my project was about. He didn't say he was proud of me. He didn't even look at the damn volcano. I remember standing there, the ribbon dangling from my fingers, and feeling this strange mix of shame and confusion twist in my stomach. I'd done something good. I'd worked hard. So why did it feel like I'd done something wrong? That moment never left me. And that was just the beginning. By the time I was 13, I stopped bringing him things. Awards. Report cards. Even birthday cards. Everything I gave him, every accomplishment, every gesture of love or effort, seemed to bounce off some invisible wall he kept around him. A wall made of resentment. And even worse, when I made mistakes, and I did because I'm human, he acted like they were final proof. Like every slip-up, every B-, every forgotten chore was just one more checkmark on a list he'd been keeping since the day I was born. "This is what I get," he'd say, shaking his head like he was the one who'd been cursed. Everything I gave up for this? Once I asked him what he meant by everything. I was 14, angry, tired of feeling like a burden just for existing. He didn't answer me. He just looked out the window and muttered, "You wouldn't understand." Maybe I didn't understand, not then. But I felt it. Every word, every silence chipped away at me. It wasn't like he screamed all the time. He wasn't that kind of cruel. No, his cruelty was quieter. More calculated. Came in the form of indifference, of belittling comments dressed up as advice, of cold stares and cooler silences. The kind of cruelty that makes you question whether it's even real. I remember one night, I must have been around 16. He was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of something strong, the ice clicking in the glass like a metronome. I'd gotten accepted into a summer leadership program at a local college. It was a big deal. Only a few students in the entire state got in. I told him about it, smiling like a fool, still trying to get him to see me. Really see me. He looked up, eyebrows raised, and said, "So who'd you have to kiss up to for that?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. But his face was flat. Expressionless. The kind of face that said, "I see through you." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and walked out of the room. That night, I stared at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening to the ticking of the old clock on the wall, and I remember thinking, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I was the reason he drank more. The reason he and Mom split up. The reason he always looked tired, angry, bitter. Maybe if I were better, smarter, quieter, more grateful, less braggy, he wouldn't hate me so much. And yet, deep down, there was another voice. Quieter but steadier. It whispered, "This isn't your fault." But that voice was drowned out by years of believing I was born into the wrong story. 'Cause that's what it felt like. Like I'd been cast in a role I never auditioned for. In my dad's story, I was always the villain. The ungrateful daughter. The one who cost him his dreams. Who tied him down. Who made his life harder. He never said those words directly, not all at once, but they were scattered through the years like breadcrumbs. A sigh here. A sarcastic comment there. Enough for me to piece it together. And somewhere along the way I started believing it. That I was this unwanted chapter in his life. A reminder of the path not taken. But the thing about stories is they can be rewritten. I remember the exact moment the shift happened. I was 17 and we'd just had another argument. I don't even remember what sparked it. Something stupid, probably. Something like me forgetting to take the trash out or rolling my eyes at one of his passive-aggressive digs. But that night, something was different. He looked at me with so much disgust. Like I was the reason he couldn't breathe. "You know," he said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his hand gripping the frame like he needed it to stay upright, "you've ruined everything. My whole damn life. I gave up everything for you. And this is what I get." It was the first time he said it so directly. No metaphors. No sarcasm. Just straight venom. I stood there, frozen. My back against the counter. My heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear the fridge humming anymore. I couldn't even cry. That was the worst part. I was so used to the digs, the guilt, the shame that I couldn't even cry. I just stared at him. Not like a daughter looking at her father, but like a person seeing a stranger for the first time. I saw it all then, the bitterness, the disappointment, the decades of blaming everyone but himself. I wasn't looking at a man who'd been wronged. I was looking at a man who refused to take responsibility. And something inside me broke. But not in the way it had before. This time it didn't shatter, I think it snapped into place. I wasn't the villain in his story. He was the unreliable narrator in mine. And the moment I realized that, everything changed. He blamed me for everything. His lost opportunities. His failed marriage. The business that crumbled before it ever got off the ground. Even the bitter silence that hung between him and my mom long after their divorce papers were signed. To hear him say it, you'd think I was some kind of cursed artifact, born to destroy whatever I touched. "You ruined my life," he spat one night, his voice cracking under the weight of something I couldn't name then. Something deeper than anger. Maybe regret. Maybe shame. Or maybe just a refusal to see himself clearly. I still remember the way he looked at me that night. Like I was the punchline to a joke no one ever laughed at. His eyes glassy, jaw tight. He stood in the kitchen with a bottle dangling from his hand, its amber contents half drained. The overhead light buzzed softly, casting a dull glow over the chipped linoleum floor. It was the kind of night where the air felt heavier than usual, like it was soaked in all the things we never said. I was 17. I had just come back from a late shift at the diner I worked at after school. My hair smelled like grease and stale coffee, my feet ached, and all I wanted was to microwave some leftover pasta and crash. But instead, I got ambushed the second I walked in the door. "Do you even care?" he said out of nowhere, his words slurred but sharp. "About what?" I asked cautiously, not even bothering to put my bag down yet. "My life, Claire. My damn life." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" He pointed a shaky finger at me, like he'd been rehearsing this monologue in his head for years. You were the beginning of the end." I didn't say anything. Not at first. 'Cause in that moment, everything stopped. The fridge hummed quietly. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. My heart pounded in my ears like a drum. "You ruined my life," he said again. slower this time, more certain, like he believed it down to his bones. And just like that, every memory I had of him, all the tension, the guilt trips, the backhanded comments, clicked together like puzzle pieces. That was his truth. That was his version of our story. But here's the thing. I was just a kid. When the marriage fell apart, I was 8. I remember hiding under the kitchen table while they screamed at each other, their voices ricocheting off the walls like bullets. I remember watching Mom throw her wedding ring into the sink like it burned her, and Dad storming out the front door, slamming it so hard the glass cracked. I wasn't the reason they stopped loving each other. I was a witness, not the cause. When the business failed, I was 11. I'd overheard him whispering into the phone late at night, begging someone for more time, more credit, more anything. I used to think if I did well in school, if I stayed quiet, if I didn't ask for too much, maybe he'd be less angry, less tired. But no matter what I did, the guilt stuck to me like smoke. And somewhere deep down, I started to believe him. Started to think maybe I had wrecked his life just by being born. But the older I got, the harder that lie was to hold. Because what if the real problem wasn't me at all? What if he was the one who never dealt with his pain? The thought terrified me. 'Cause if it was true, it meant all the years I spent trying to fix things, trying to be perfect, had been for nothing. I started paying closer attention, not just to what he said, but what he didn't. The silences. The way his mouth twitched when I asked about his past. The way he never took responsibility for anything. It was like he was stuck in a loop, constantly rewriting the story so he came out the victim. And I was the villain in every version. I started journaling about it. Writing down little things he'd say, just so I could reread them and convince myself I wasn't imagining it. That I wasn't crazy. Every argument became a minefield. One wrong step and boom, he'd explode. Not with fists, but with words designed to break me down. And when I didn't respond, that's when he'd get really quiet. That punishing kind of silence. The kind that made you second-guess your own memory. So I learned to survive. To stay small. To nod instead of push back. To stay out of sight when he was in a mood. I told myself that was just what love looked like from him, wounded, harsh, and conditional. But inside, I was burning. Burning with questions that never got answered. Why did he hold on to so much resentment? Why couldn't he let it go? Why did he refuse to see that he was the common denominator in every bridge he burned? I began to wonder if he ever looked in the mirror long enough to see his own cracks. Or if he'd just decided it was easier to blame me than face the truth. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon, a few months after that night in the kitchen. I had come home early from school because my last class was canceled. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. I walked into the living room and found him sitting on the couch, nursing another glass. TV was on, muted. He didn't notice me at first. Just sat there, staring blankly. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't carry the blame. The guilt. The silence. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to look at me, startled. I took a deep breath. "Can I ask you something?" He squinted, like he couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or amused. "What? Do you even know who's really ruined your life?" His jaw clenched. "I mean it," I said, stepping further into the room. "Because it's not me. I've spent years thinking it was. Believing you. But I look back now and I see it clearly. You didn't lose things because of me. You lost them because you never fought for them." He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "I was just a kid," I said, my voice shaking. "You were the adult. You were supposed to protect me. But all you ever did was punish me for things that weren't mine to carry." The rain outside grew louder, like it was applauding the storm inside our house. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. Just a slight movement of his lips. A twitch. crack in the armor. And in that pause between the silence and his denial, I saw it. The flicker of doubt. The reflection of everything he didn't want to face. He wasn't angry anymore. He was afraid. 'Cause deep down he knew. And he knew I knew. I stared at him, no longer afraid of what I'd see. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need some grand revelation. I just needed him to hear it. To finally sit with the truth of what he'd done and what he hadn't. And then I asked it again. Slower this time. Do you even know who's really ruined your life? He couldn't answer. He just stared at me, mouth slightly open, eyes flickering with something that wasn't quite recognition, but wasn't denial either. It was like watching a man teeter at the edge of a cliff, finally realizing the wind behind him was his own doing. The silence stretched long and tight between us, like an elastic band pulled too far. For a second I thought maybe he was going to break the cycle. That he'd finally say something real. Something true. But his lips never moved. Not even a whisper. I stood across from him in the dim, half-lit living room, the photo still in my hand. The one I dug out of that forgotten cardboard box in the garage. The one covered in dust and cobwebs, shoved behind rusted tools and old tax folders like it was a memory he'd tried to bury for good. It was a picture of him. Taken maybe 10 years ago. Back when he still smiled with his whole face, not just the corners of his mouth. His arm was around me. I must have been 7 or 8. We were at the state fair. There was a paper cup of lemonade in my hand, and his other hand was shielding his eyes from the sun as he looked down at me. He looked happy. The kind of happy I never remembered seeing outside that photo. And he looked so young. So full of possibility. Now standing in front of me in this crumbling living room that always smelled faintly of beer and burnt toast, he looked like the ghost of that man. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with sleeplessness. His hair, once thick and dark, had thinned and grayed around the edges. His posture had given way to a slow, defeated slump. Even his voice, usually so sharp and commanding, was reduced to breathy fragments when he tried to speak. But he didn't speak. Not when it mattered. 'Cause deep down I think he knew. He knew the truth was buried beneath years of denial, excuses, and stories he told himself for so long that even he believed them. Stories where he was the martyr. The man who gave everything up and got nothing back. The man betrayed by fate, by circumstance, by me. But that man, the one who blamed me, wasn't real. He was a mask. A disguise worn by someone too scared to admit that his own failures were self-made. That the missed chances, the broken relationships, the bitterness he wore like armor, none of them were because of me. They were because of the choices he refused to own. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted him to sit with it. With the photo. With the version of himself he left behind and the one that stood there now. I wanted him to look. Really look. So I stepped forward and held it out to him. He hesitated like it was something dangerous. Then, with slow, trembling fingers, he took it from me. His eyes dropped to the image, and for a second, he froze. Time felt like it stopped. The rain tapping against the windows was the only sound, a soft and steady rhythm like a clock counting down something inevitable. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then his hand dropped to his side, the photo limp between his fingers. "I remember that day," he murmured, his voice hoarse. I said nothing. I didn't trust myself to speak. He looked down again and I saw it, the facade cracking. Just a hairline fracture at first. But it was there. That tight grip on resentment he'd clung to for decades loosening. His jaw quivered, his shoulders hunched. He looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see rage in his eyes. Not pride. Not blame. I saw vulnerability. Raw. Naked. Unmasked. Should have been a relief. Should have made me feel validated. Like all the hurt and confusion and years of carrying his pain like it was mine had finally led to something real. But instead, all I felt was sorrow. Because I knew with a kind of aching certainty that it was too late. Too late for apologies. Too late for redos. Too late for father-daughter talks over coffee and quiet, earned forgiveness. I had already spent too many years waiting for him to meet me halfway, to see me not as the scapegoat for his failures but as a person who deserved love. Now, standing there, watching the man who once towered over my childhood crumble beneath the weight of his own reflection, I realized I didn't need his apology anymore. I just needed him to see it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. He looked up at me again, eyes glassy, lips parted as though words were on the edge. But they never came. His hands were shaking now, the photo trembling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He started. But then he stopped, closed his mouth, looked away. And I knew. He couldn't say it. Couldn't bring himself to cross the line between knowing the truth and admitting it. And that's when the sadness hit me hardest. 'Cause in that moment I saw him not as the father I had spent my life trying to win over but as a man. A man swallowed by his own fear. A man who had become a prisoner of his own narrative. I almost reached for his hand. Almost stepped closer. But something inside me pulled back. Because sometimes offering comfort becomes another form of betrayal, to yourself. So I stood there instead. Silent. Letting him sit in the wreckage of his own making. I could still feel the rough texture of the carpet under my feet, and the stale air that hadn't moved in hours. The flickering light above cast both of our shadows long and broken across the walls. He sat down on the edge of the couch like someone had just knocked the wind out of him. Still clutching the photo. Still silent. And I just watched. 'Cause what do you do when you finally win the truth, but it comes wrapped in everything you've lost? Maybe there's no right answer. Maybe there never was. But what I knew in that moment, what I felt in my chest like a quiet exhale, was that I didn't need anything else from him. Not closure. Not forgiveness. Not even acknowledgement. 'Cause I saw it. In his eyes. In the way he looked at that photo. In the way he couldn't look at me. He knew. And that was enough. But it was too late for apologies. I walked away that day. Not with slamming doors or screaming accusations. Not in a blaze of fury like some final act of defiance. I walked away quietly, deliberately, because for the first time in my life I understood something I hadn't been willing to accept before. You can't save someone who refuses to save themselves. No matter how much you love them. No matter how much pain you absorb trying to make sense of their suffering. No matter how many times you replay your own memories asking yourself if maybe you were the problem all along. I had done all of that. For years. I had twisted myself into emotional origami, folding and shrinking and bending to fit the space my father allowed for me. I had tried silence. I had tried apology. I had tried excellence, bringing home perfect grades, cleaning up messes that weren't mine, smiling when I felt like breaking. None of it made him see me. And that day, after the photo, after the truth hovered between us like smoke from a fire long put out, I stood in the living room of my childhood home and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not the kind that comes with justice or revenge, but the kind that comes when a weight is lifted and for the first time you realize how heavy it really was. I glanced around the room as I stood there, frozen in that moment. The worn-out couch. The chipped paint on the windowsill. The framed picture of a family that no longer existed, me, Dad, and Mom, smiling in some posed, forgotten holiday snapshot from a decade ago. It looked like a lie now. A frozen fragment of something that had never really been whole. Dad was still sitting on the couch, the photograph in his lap. His shoulders hunched like the wind had been knocked out of him. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. Smaller. His mouth opened once, maybe to speak, but no sound came. His eyes flicked up to me, but I didn't return the look. Because I knew if I did, I might hesitate. And I couldn't afford hesitation. Not now. So I reached for my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and took one last look at the man who had raised me with walls instead of warmth. "You know," I said, my voice barely audible, "I spent years trying to be someone you'd be proud of. I thought if I did everything right, maybe you'd, I don't know, love me the way I needed. The way kids are supposed to be loved." He didn't respond. He just stared at the photo in his lap like it held answers he couldn't bring himself to read. "I used to think your anger was my fault," I went on, stepping toward the door. "But now I know it was never about me. Not really." The doorknob felt cool in my palm, and for a moment I stood there, hand on the exit, heart in my throat. Should have been harder than this. But it wasn't. 'Cause something in me had already let go. And in walking away, I wasn't abandoning him. I was choosing me. I wasn't acting out of bitterness. That's the part people never understand. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about punishment. It was about survival. About peace. About reclaiming something I hadn't realized I was allowed to take back. Myself. For years, my identity had been tangled in his perception of me. The ungrateful daughter. The disappointment. The scapegoat for every regret he didn't want to face. He wrote the script and I kept playing the part. But something had shifted. The day I stopped trying to prove my worth to him was the day I discovered it had never been missing. It had just been buried. Buried beneath his projections. His bitterness. His refusal to heal. And so I stepped outside. The air hit me like a wave, cool, sharp, real. It was late afternoon, and the sun had begun to dip behind the trees, casting long, golden shadows across the cracked pavement of the driveway. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, and for the first time in a long time I actually felt the world around me. The warmth of the sun on my skin. Crisp rustle of wind through dry branches. The distant sound of children playing down the street. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. No tears. No panic. No second-guessing. Just stillness. Behind me, the house stood silent. The same house I'd cried in, laughed in, begged for affection in. A place that should have been a shelter but had always felt like a battleground. And now I was walking away from it. Not running. Not fleeing in chaos. Walking. There's a quiet power in that. A kind of strength you don't realize you have until the moment you need it most. I freed myself that day, not with fury but with clarity. With acceptance. With the understanding that I could no longer carry his pain on my shoulders like a duty. That I didn't have to earn love by being smaller or quieter or better. I stopped being the villain in his story. 'Cause it had never really been about me. It was his story to begin with. His regrets. His denial. His pain. And when he couldn't control it, he pinned it to me like a target. But I wasn't his scapegoat anymore. I was no longer willing to shrink to fit inside the narrative he built to excuse his own heartbreak. So I started writing my own ending. And it didn't involve blame. Didn't involve revenge. It involved freedom. 'Cause sometimes the greatest revenge isn't confrontation. It's not screaming at someone until they understand the damage they caused. It's not waiting for them to say the words they never will. Sometimes the greatest revenge is choosing yourself. Choosing peace. Choosing to walk away with your head held high, even if the person you're leaving behind never acknowledges the weight of what you've carried. That's what I did that day. I didn't slam the door. I didn't burn the bridge. I just walked away. Now, years later, I don't hear those words anymore. They used to echo like clockwork in my head, those 5 words he spat at me in that kitchen all those years ago. You ruined my life. They clung to me like static, clattering around inside me every time I achieved something good. Every time I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. Every time someone told me I was strong or kind or doing well. Those words would crawl out from the shadows and whisper, "But you're still the one who wrecked everything, remember?" But not anymore. not in the way they used to. Time doesn't erase pain, but it has a way of softening the sharp edges. Like the way ocean waves grind broken glass into sea glass. Smooth. Muted. Till there, but different. I live in a different city now. 3 states away from that house with its flickering light bulbs and dusty corners and air thick with unspoken blame. I rent a small apartment with sun-streaked windows and hardwood floors that creak when it's cold. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down that knows my order by heart, chai latte, oat milk, extra hot. I walk there most mornings. I carry a journal in my bag and I write. Sometimes about him. Sometimes about me. Sometimes about the space in between where silence used to live. And when I look in the mirror now, I don't flinch. I don't see the girl who tried too hard, who held her breath to avoid being noticed, who walked on eggshells in her own home, who carried guilt in her lungs like it was oxygen. I don't see the daughter who ruined a life. I see a woman who survived one. That's the real story. The one I never thought I'd be brave enough to tell, not even to myself. Truth I uncovered in the quiet after the chaos, when I finally gave myself permission to stop performing, to stop fixing, to stop waiting for him to say what I needed to hear. He never did. Maybe he never will. But that doesn't matter anymore. Because healing didn't come from his apology, it came from mine. The one I gave to the little girl I used to be. The girl who thought if she just said sorry enough times, he'd stop being angry. That she could earn love the same way people earn grades or gold stars. I whispered it to her one night, sitting on my bed, legs crossed, lights dimmed. I had just come home from a long shift at the nonprofit where I work now, helping at-risk youth, kids who in more ways than one remind me of myself. I looked at a childhood photo of me. Curly hair. Wide eyes. A tight-lipped smile like she was trying not to take up too much space. And I whispered, "I'm sorry they made you carry it all." Then I said it again. Louder. "I'm sorry he made you believe it was your fault." And that night something shifted in me. Something uncoiled. I cried until my chest hurt, but it wasn't the kind of cry that left me empty. It was the kind that left me clear. That was when I knew I had finally stepped out of his story. Dad's reflection? Still out there somewhere. Tucked in the same narrative probably. Still pointing fingers at shadows, never looking directly at the man in the mirror. I sometimes wonder if he ever found that photo, the one I left behind, framed on the coffee table as I walked out that day. The one of him smiling, younger, before bitterness built walls he couldn't see over. I wonder if he ever saw the truth in it. Contradiction. Possibility. The version of himself that wasn't drowning in resentment. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. That sentence. I come back to it often. That's not my burden to carry anymore. It's like a mantra now. Something I tell myself in the quiet moments when I feel that old guilt creeping back in, dressed in nostalgia or a sudden wave of loneliness. I say it when I see fathers and daughters laughing together in the park and wonder what that must be like. I say it when my phone buzzes and his name doesn't appear, and I realize I'm not waiting for it anymore. I say it when I feel peace settle into the spaces where pain used to live. A peace I didn't think I deserved, but do. 'Cause I gave him the mirror. I did everything I could. I spoke the truth. I showed him the parts of himself he spent years avoiding. I stood my ground without screaming. I offered him a moment of reckoning, and what he did with that moment was up to him. He looked but didn't see. He listened but didn't hear. And when I realized that was never going to change, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I let go. I stopped trying to untangle the threads of his anger. I stopped trying to decode his silence. I stopped twisting myself into knots trying to be someone he could love without conditions. 'Cause the truth is, I deserved love all along. Without shrinking. Without proving. Without earning it in pain. I gave him a mirror, but I gave myself something greater. Permission. Permission to walk away. Permission to reclaim my story. Permission to say, I am not broken because someone else refused to heal. That permission was everything. And now, when I wake up in the morning and look at myself, really look, I see someone whole. Someone scarred, yes, but not defined by those scars. Someone stronger for having made it out. Someone softer, not in spite of the pain, but because of how she carried it and still learned to let it go. That's my story now. That's my ending. I gave him a mirror, and I gave myself permission to walk away.